Hi, my name's Penny Snowball. Welcome to number 6 of a series of 12 short documentaries entitled In Search of My Mental Health, A Journey to Recovery. And this section is we're going to be talking about maternal deprivation and the early psychological wound, and basically how that kind of really affects people you don't not even aware of what's actually going on for you, but just the depths of that really. Just exploring it. I think it's an issue that's not really discussed enough, and I know for myself that there's, as we were saying in an earlier section, it's that primal need for my attachment to my mother that I feel I didn't have, and I know I didn't have it. And I feel this isn't about, it's not about blame really. It's kind of, we've gone way past the blame. This isn't about blame. There's a great speaker in America called John Bradshaw who talks a lot about this maternal deprivation, and he says not about blaming the parents, but it's about the facts. The facts are, if you don't have your bond and your maternal, that first early connection with your mother, I believe very strongly that you spend your life looking for it. That's what I felt I've done. I've had 4 surrogate mothers at one stage because they were all bound to piss off, so one would disappear, so I'd have to have backup. And I hadn't really realised just how my life was governed by needing that need to connect, and at the same time being shut down and numb. It's really quite it's a strange mix, really. What's your kind of experience on this, guys, or what's your feelings on this from either personal experience or your own looking at experiencing it in the field that you've worked in, whatever you feel most comfortable with, really?
I think in the training, in all the sort of therapeutic training that I've had, it's very much focused on early developmental needs not being met. And the earlier that things go wrong, the more profound it is and the more damaging it is. And also, I think the more difficult to get in touch with because it's out of conscious memory.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of a newborn baby, and if it's hungry or scared or lonely, it can't think, oh, well, I'm sure I'll get something to eat eventually. It's sort of, I'm going to die if I don't get it. I need some external goodness. And I think echoes of that, probably, if there's that lack of maternal attunement, probably carry on throughout our lives.
Can you give me an example of how that, from your experience, how that would look, what that would look like, apart from what I've said? So from
my mind's gone blank now. I mean, I've done an awful lot of therapeutic work, sort of counselling, on my own behalf, because I was adopted when I was 6 weeks old, and it's all imaginary stuff because obviously I can't remember. But when you're a little tiny baby, you know sounds, you know smells. The rest of the world is sort of completely alien place to you. And so not feeling safe, not feeling secure, not feeling held, because suddenly you might have been moved to sort of a different household, to a different family. It would just be sort of totally overwhelming. And I think that reverberates, or can reverberate, throughout your life. And it's nobody's fault, but it's just how it's experienced.
Is that attunement as well? It's like saying about that attunement. It's like I had this discussion not so long ago about this. So if the baby cries and the mother comes, then the baby knows that it is loved, and if that is continual, then the baby eventually gets to know that it matters in this world. That's kind of that's how you become exist. That's how you become to exist.
But also, if the baby cries and the mother's nervous or impatient or a bit at a loss, the baby's going to pick that up. And then it's sort of, something really, potentially sort of catastrophic is happening. I'm crying and my mother's tense. I can pick up the tension or the impatience or the, the sort of feeling a bit at a loss of how to deal with it. And I think that can be picked up. You know, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about parenting classes and how, I think you said, Richard, how important it would be and how good it would be if people were taught about the importance of very early
The problem
experience.
with this is that it not only can happen to the young child where it'll impact on a baby, but it continues right through. And for me, I mean, I had a mother up until, and I mean, I adored my mother. She was, although I learned later, her behaviour had been probably a negative behaviour towards me. I loved her, and she died when I was 23, and that loss was one of the biggest shutdowns in my life because I felt so let down. She'd gone, you know.
Wow.
And she died 3 months before I was about to get married.
Wow.
So she's suddenly gone from my life at a point where I expected her to be my strongest support. And so you know, it was for me at that age, it was a huge loss, and I was still quite immature. So I was still a young 23-year-old. I wasn't mature at all. So I felt it enormously, and I think it sometimes can impact later on even more than it can when you're a child. Children are quite resilient, and very often they get over it, you know. And if they're loved later on, they can ride through it. But if that sort of loss continues, then of course it gets worse and worse and worse. So, but if sometimes children can move into adoption and find themselves tremendously loved, and they sometimes they don't even want to know who their parents were, do they? They're
No.
not, or they do want to know, but it's just an interest thing more than that. But for some people, and I think this is about the structure of that person, emotionally, that they can say, well, why did my mother reject me? And of course you've gone straight into that negative mode. Why did my mother reject me? Why did she give me away? And of course that's that for that particular person. And this is again where I say this comes down to the individual again. What's the individual's makeup? Because some of this stuff, it's really interesting how one person. I had two brothers and a sister. I was the really, really shy one. How come my two brothers and sisters weren't shy like me? I don't know that.
I don't know. It's interesting.
We all four were different, and I believe some of this stuff we're actually born with. Maybe it's in the womb. What's going on for my mother when I'm actually in the womb? Perhaps she was much more confident with the other three, and because she felt I was a mistake, that's where I got my, shyness and that from. Maybe that was what it was, because the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, that's what it seems. But I believe this not only starts there, but it moves on through your life.
Yeah,
so
without a doubt.
It can be changed. People can progress in a positive way, or they can progress in a negative way.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's that whole thing of how you interpret it. For me, I think it's so primeval. It's called the limbic part of the brain, isn't it? It's that primitive part of the brain. And apparently midwives say that, or I've asked a friend of mine actually if she had any abuse issues from her childhood, because apparently midwives are now getting very, very aware that this stuff is buried. So, and I've heard people talk about it, it's buried so deeply that when you have your own child, you can go into, because it's the only time, then the next time it's triggered is your survival mechanism. When you have a child, so much of this stuff can just come out. I think that's what happened for me when I had my son. So many of the memories that I didn't even know what was going on. I really almost went crazy. I thought everybody was coming to steal him. Everybody was going to take him away. I left the country. I really believed that they were all coming to take my baby. And there was nobody could have convinced me otherwise. I absolutely believed it. So consequently, a lot of what I've had to do, a lot of reparative work around his father. I didn't trust anybody that was, would take care of us. I just didn't. I didn't believe it. And That's the other thing, isn't it? It's like what has happened to you, what's buried in there that you don't even know about. Like you were saying, smells and all of these things. And as you go back to the womb, you know, the womb, what happened in the womb, what happened to you? Were you wanted? Were you loved? Were you nurtured? Or was your mother really, really not really wanting you? Because I never felt wanted. I've never, as I said earlier, I've just never felt that I was wanted. My mum got pregnant when she was 18. They got married, but, you know, it's like, I don't know, I just felt like I was always that. I wrote a poem about it years ago called The Unwanted Child Hits Rebellion Again, you know, another one of my drama kind of things, but I've just never, it's a strange thing, and it's intangible. Nobody could say, yes, you were, because it feels like it in every cell of my body. I don't know. It's a weird feeling, really. Which is, you know, it does happen. I think it can happen.
I think I agree with you. I have a great difficulty in getting over a feeling of feeling good enough. And you know, I know I'm good enough because I've had the jobs, I've held the jobs down, I've done the stuff, you know, I've been in relationships, I've done this stuff. But there's still not this feeling of feeling good enough, you know, and that lives for me, and it's difficult to get over.
Yeah.